Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Last time we left Matt Powell, he said he could list 10 atheists who believe that something came from nothing, followed by him listing one. The next section is titled What Evolution Actually Teaches. I harped on this a bit in Matt's last movie, but it bears mentioning again. Evolution doesn't teach anything. Teachers teach us things. I'm not sure why evolution gets anthropomorphized like this. Like, would anyone say that gravity teaches that things fall down? No. So why would we talk about evolution like that? Anyway, let's go ahead and see what evolution teaches us.
Here's another one for you. You can't resist a headline that from the Mail. Monkeys who sailed 900 miles across the Atlantic.
Evolutionists also claim that because monkeys had to have somehow gotten to South America from Africa. That's what evolutionary theory states, and they have a problem figuring out how. So their best conclusion that their best scientists have come up with is this idea that monkeys surfed across the ocean.
Matt, have you ever heard of the concept of steelmanning an argument? That's when you try to state your opponent's case in the strongest way you think it can be stated. So when you read an article about a potential giant floating vegetation raft that transported monkeys from Africa to South America, calling it surfing is you obviously making it out to be much more ridiculous than it actually is. Now, there are a couple things I'd like to get into here. Firstly, the giant vegetation raft is not the only hypothesis. There's also the fact that there would have been more land bridges when the monkeys made their way over, as sea levels would have been quite a bit lower. Secondly, this is only a problem because of timing. Both creationists and real scientists agree that the supercontinent Pangaea was a thing in the past. So, again, if we were trying to just make the data fit with what we wanted, it would be easy enough to just say that the monkeys got there when it was directly connected, and then you wouldn't need to invoke land bridges or vegetation rafts. As to the article you referenced, it was specifically about a study published in April 2020, which found fossil teeth that fit in better with old world monkeys than with new. So the question became one of how many times did a migration happen between Africa and South America? And the answer seems to be twice, and one proposed method of migration is on a vegetation raft in a time when South America and Africa were much closer together.
Now that has a lot of problems. There's tides out there. You know, they probably get blown off their surf. Who has ever seen a monkey surf? I don't even think they can.
I don't even think they can surf, he says in a video where he also shows footage of monkeys surfing. You didn't have to use that clip, Matt. I'm sure there were other things you could have included in there if you were really hurting to get the runtime up. Also, this makes it look like your reading comprehension really is atrocious if you're confusing massive rafts of vegetation with small surfboards.
Some things come to my mind immediately. First, what would ever possess a group of monkeys to find anything of a platform and take to sea?
Nothing. If you think they did it on purpose, then you weren't paying attention to any of the articles. But then again, if you're getting your information from Matt, you probably think they did it on a surfboard, so clearly actually understanding what the articles were talking about is a fairly low priority. Mats of vegetation are something that happens sometimes during wet weather, and sometimes they can be solid enough to contain trees that are still standing. If a monkey is in such a tree when it becomes dislodged and starts floating away, it could find itself stuck on this raft as it gets washed out to sea. In the right conditions, it is entirely plausible that such a raft could make the journey from Africa to South America in a time when the distance between the two was significantly smaller than it is today. Yes, it would take a combination of just the right circumstances in order for that to happen, but since we're talking about an event that happened twice that we know of in 50 million years, it stands to reason that there were many more failed raftings than there were successful ones in that time period. But no, the monkeys didn't set out to build a raft and go exploring on the open oceans. That is not what any scientist thinks, and you should be ashamed of the fact that lazy research on your part led to that line being left in your video.
Secondly, how did they survive?
With great difficulty. Their diet was mostly fruit, so as long as an adequate amount of fruit was caught up in the vegetation, food would have been okay, and fruit has enough water content that they might have been able to avoid dehydration, but I don't imagine it was a pleasant voyage.
Now, I did a little background on this, and if you rowed a canoe, you'd move at about 3 miles per hour. That's if you rowed. and you would make it across in a straight line, which is not possible, by the way, if you're floating, from Africa to South America. It would take you a minimum of 65 days rowing.
I'm not sure how that's even relevant. If you do a tiny bit of research into this, which you just said you did, then you'll find that every site that gives 3 miles per hour as an average speed for the canoe also mentions that this is in still water with a straight line, 2 paddlers, and no wind. As soon as you tweak any of those parameters, the number changes. Did you take current into account with your calculation? Do you even know what the Atlantic currents would have been like in the Paleogene? Did you take into consideration that the distance would have been significantly shorter in the Paleogene? At least for the last one, I can confirm that he did not, because running the same calculation with the 2,000 kilometer distance given as the higher end of the estimate, I find that it would take 17.3 days to make the trip. Add in favorable currents and winds, and you get a potentially much shorter voyage. In the video I showed earlier of the vegetation raft, it's hard to estimate, but using the bridge it goes under for scale, I have conservatively estimated that it was traveling at about 4 meters per second, which is about 14.4 kilometers per hour, which would get you across a 2,000 kilometer stretch of ocean in just under 6 days. Of course, it would not be traveling at that speed the whole time, most likely, but a range of 6 to 17 days does not seem that far out of the realm of plausibility.
Now, these monkeys have no way to propel themselves. They're bobbing around out there like a cork in the ocean, and that brings to mind the perils that one experiences at sea.
Yep, it was a dangerous and difficult journey, so much so that it has only happened twice successfully that we know of over a 50 million year time period. How many monkeys got washed out to sea and just died? Probably a lot more than made it safely to a new continent. Nobody's claiming it was some easy thing and monkeys are just really good sailors and it happened all the time.
The surfing monkey theory is so hilarious to me, I'm almost embarrassed even talking about it. But the thing is, we have to talk about it because they're actually promoting this in so-called science books today.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. If this is so utterly ridiculous, how did kangaroos get to Australia after the flood? How did sloths get to South America? Hell, what is your explanation for how the monkeys got to South America? You've got the same problem. There exists a population of animals on a continent separated by an ocean on either side from any continent that is connected by land to their point of origin. So how did the monkeys get to South America, Matt? What is your explanation? I've seen creationist explanations run the gamut from going the long way round over a land bridge in the Bering Strait, to similar, though usually more ridiculous, vegetation rafts, to animals actually being propelled by volcanic eruptions into their various locations. Which explanation do you favor? Now keep in mind here, there are like 3 groups of animals that exist in South America because of these vegetation rafts. The New World monkeys, rodents, and now this one group of Old World monkeys that ended up going extinct. Of these 3 groups, 2 of them, the rodents and the New World monkeys, likely arrived at the same time. So if it were a rafting event rather than a land bridge, that would just mean that rodents were on the raft with the monkeys. So that's 2 rafting events over 50 million years, which you guys are going on about how amazing it would be to survive such a journey. Meanwhile, the creationist explanation is often something similar. Rafts formed from trees that were uprooted during the flood. Except you guys need dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands to millions of species to survive on such rafts in ideal conditions in order to have all gotten the unique species to their various locations. Everything from the army ants of the Amazon to the koalas of Australia. Oh yeah, did I mention that koalas are actually quite stupid for mammals? They don't even have the ability to recognize eucalyptus leaves if they have been removed from the tree. So how these guys could have survived a year in a boat with no eucalyptus trees followed by a rafting journey back to Australia is beyond me. My point is, 2 rafting events in ideal conditions over a 50 million year period is a way more plausible hypothesis than conservatively hundreds of such voyages over a couple years after the flood.
And it's just a reminder that these people, whenever there's evidence, which is what science is supposed to be based off, that there is a creator, whenever they find evidence that disproves evolution, they go to just crazy theories like the surfing monkey theory.
How exactly would the presence of monkeys in South America prove a creator? You already think that dating methods are some giant conspiracy. Would it not be easier for scientists to simply pretend that the evidence points to the monkeys having moved to South America when it was directly connected to Africa, rather than come up with these crazy theories? The fact of the matter is, we don't know if these vegetation rafts actually are what did it. We don't really know how they got there, and we might never figure it out for sure. But it is a fact that they are there, and they were not there when Pangea was a thing. And now we know that one group of Old World monkeys was also there, which suggests another crossing. And the only reason it suggests another crossing rather than saying they came across at the same time is because we have mapped the evolutionary relationships of these monkeys, and the teeth that were found in South America have distinctive features that place them pretty firmly in the Old World monkey category. If evolution were the lie that you claim it is, it would have been much easier just to classify these fossils as having been a new species of New World monkey, and Bob's your uncle, problem solved. But they didn't do that, did they?
And they come up with stuff like that, and we're supposed to take them serious, and we're supposed to let them intimidate us into silence.
No, you're not supposed to be intimidated into silence. Ideally, we would love for you guys to actually learn some stuff about science and maybe become productive members of society instead of being the anchors keeping us down. I would be absolutely delighted if Matt here would start actually learning how stuff works and updated his opinions and worldview accordingly. But I'm not going to hold my breath for it.
On what we believe when they're coming up with stuff like that, I find it insulting, and it's embarrassing that we even have to address these type of things.
Well then, now you know how I feel most of the time, this time included. Since the 2 vegetation rafts over a long period of time are way more plausible than the hundreds, thousands, or even millions of such rafts that would have been needed for creationism to work.
Anything's acceptable as long as it doesn't include God today.
Yeah, tell that to Francis Collins.
Monkeys are fairly smart, so I don't see why it wouldn't be possible.
Okay, it's confession time. I had never heard this idea until I got to this segment of Matt's video, and then I read through a bunch of different articles and papers that mentioned the subject in order to make sure I thoroughly understand what was going on, and I'm not ashamed to admit that it still doesn't seem right to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and just assume that Ethan has never encountered this idea before either, and that you just sprung this on him. And you probably worded it in a way that made it sound like monkeys built a raft rather than being caught on one that was being swept out to sea, and that was Ethan's only experience with this idea. So, what, you want a cookie for being able to get a guy who flat out told you that science isn't his best subject to say something that doesn't sound scientific?
Squids and octopuses have a different genetic build than any other creature in the world.
No, they don't. It's still DNA, similar to DNA of all other life on Earth. Same base pairs, same shared genetic material, same as everything else on Earth.
So scientists have come to the conclusion that they couldn't have come from any other sea creature. So here's what evolutionary theory states about how they got here. Evolutionists claim, it says, one plausible explanation, in our view, is that the genes are likely new extraterrestrial imports to Earth.
Nope. One study, conducted by a bunch of scientists who didn't see fit to include a single zoologist among their number, mentioned that this is something they find plausible. Based on what, you might ask? Octopuses have more protein-coding genes than humans. That's it. That's the whole basis for that speculation. They make basic mistakes in this paper about cephalopod phylogenies, and they never even specify what they mean by octopus. Are they talking about the entire genus, a specific species of octopus, a different grouping of octopuses? It's also worth noting that they came to this conclusion based on the sequencing of a single octopus genome. As of the paper's publishing, there was one octopus genome available for examination, and the rest of the cephalopods were also incredibly sparse, so they didn't really have something to compare it to. They ignored the fossil history of cephalopod evolution. They incorrectly categorized several cephalopods. They didn't define important terms that they were using. It was a terrible paper, and it was ridiculed and ripped apart by the scientific community. In fact, the screenshot in your video is from the Snopes article that debunked the claim that researchers have discovered the octopus genome contains alien DNA. I mean, they do call it mixed based on the fact that this one paper exists that does mention alien genes as a plausible hypothesis, so technically, scientists did say it's a possibility, but that opinion has never been, and likely will never be, the scientific consensus.
But there are some that believe that scientists and their ideas and their work is infallible.
Maybe there are people that think that. If there are, those people need a better education on the scientific method. Science is a process of self-correction. Just because a paper got published doesn't mean that suddenly everybody accepts it. Far from it. For a claim as drastic as the space alien octopus claim, a best case scenario for them would be that their paper indicated that further study in that area is needed. However, their paper was so poorly done that further study in that area is not indicated at this time. Certainly, we still have a lot to learn about cephalopod evolution and the various cephalopod genomes, but as of yet, there's absolutely nothing to indicate an extraterrestrial origin for octopuses or their genes.
And to that I say, nonsense.
Agreed. Thinking that scientists are infallible is nonsense. We recognize that scientists are fallible, and that's why we have the peer review system. And as this paper demonstrates, it's not a perfect system, but it is the best we have.
They flew here on the back of comets. That's what you believe. You believe that squid and octopus eggs were attached on the back of comets. They flew and they landed in the ocean, and then they became mortal enemies with one another.
This guy is truly something else. This whole thing is something else, really. This whole segment betrays the fact that this video has been made not to convince atheists or to convert people to Matt's religion. It is to reassure people who already agree with him. So he finds a crazy-sounding study that somehow made it to publication, and then he presents it as though it were the consensus because it made it to publication. And then he has Raw Matt directly address the supposed atheists in the audience to tell them that this is what you believe. A futile gesture to any atheist actually watching. You telling me what I believe doesn't actually make it so. However, someone confidently telling atheists what he thinks they believe as though they actually believe it would definitely make believers more comfortable with their stereotypical notions of what atheists are.
I do need to look that up if that's true.
Yeah, that's what evolution teaches, is that monkeys actually got on rafts.
Back to the monkeys, I guess. And yeah, there he is, telling you that he needs to look that up because he doesn't know enough to comment on it. And no, evolution does not teach that monkeys got on rafts. Creationists certainly teach that when talking about how New World monkeys got to South America, but evolution just dictates how they diversified. How they got where they diversified doesn't particularly matter to evolution. The raft thing is just one of a few different hypotheses about it. But the fact is that one way or another, they got there.
Evolution literally teaches that our face and that our hair was created as a cushion, and that we were actually punched to the point where natural selection had to create a cushion in our face. That is weird.
Yeah, that is weird. But the weirdness of an idea has no bearing on the truth of that idea. The thinking behind that study was the fact that a male lion's mane does serve a protective function during combat, so maybe the human beard has a similar function. The jawbone is one of the most commonly fractured bones when people start messing around with each other, so it makes sense. The other hypothesis here is that it's a product of sexual selection. Enough women like facial hair enough to choose mates with more of it over mates with less of it over the years, and so it becomes a trait that was selected for. Both of these hypotheses make perfect sense.
It is shocking that in 2020, with all the information that we have and the ability to Google things, that people even believe in evolution.
More shocking than that are the several basic mistakes and misunderstandings that made it into the final cut of your video when a quick Google search would expose them for the mistakes and misunderstandings that they are. Except, wait, this is Matt Powell we're talking about. He probably either didn't bother looking at the information closely enough to figure out where he was wrong, or he did and chose to misrepresent it anyway. Seriously, Google the octopus thing. It is easier to find science news articles making fun of it than it is to find articles that are friendly to it. And yet, Matt here presents it as though it is the scientific consensus.
They say that the reason that we lost our ape hair is because apes started sewing and knitting clothes.
Well, as with most of the why questions of evolutionary biology, the answers are rather speculative. It's definitely not as simple as just having developed clothes, though. Clothes may have played a role, along with harnessing fire, but they almost certainly were not a sole factor. The most widely accepted idea is that it happened when our ancestors moved from the shady forest into an open savanna. Those of them with less body hair had an easier time with thermoregulation in the heat of the day, and so could be more successful hunters. This may also be why humans have significantly more sweat glands than the other apes.
So they didn't need their hair anymore.
Think about it, people. Logic, come on. Why did it start needing to wear a jacket? An ape today doesn't need a jacket no matter where it lives. It can live in the tropics, you can put it in a zoo in the city, you can put it in the Arctic. They live out in the frost in Japan, up in the high mountains, and they just sit there. They don't need clothes.
I like how he's literally showing a video of a monkey sitting in a hot spring to avoid the cold weather in Japan, while ranting about how they're fine in cold weather. All of this is a bit of a moot point, though, if it were the hunting patterns that cause the hair loss rather than the clothes. That being said, most apes live pretty close to the equator. In fact, the Japanese macaque is the only cold-climate non-human primate, and the ones that live in zoos generally have access to warm indoor areas that they can go to if it gets too cold for them. So, even if you were right, you're wrong, but as it turns out, you're wrong.
But does anybody actually really believe this? Or are these just theories that they throw out and hope, somebody actually, takes that as law?
Well, if you just got the explanation of something scientific from Matt, then I feel comfortable saying, no, nobody believes this, because that's how wrong Matt usually is. If the answer just happens to be yes, you can bet your ass he's leaving something important out.
They scoff. They mock at you. But they don't even know what evolution teaches.
The projection is strong with this one. This whole video so far has been Matt scoffing and mocking evolution without seeming to know even the most basic facts about it.
Duck-billed dinosaurs once crossed the ocean. The first duck-billed dinosaur fossil discovered in Africa. Because Africa was isolated by the deep oceans at that time, duck-billed dinosaurs must have crossed hundreds of miles of open water.
Where's their source for that? Well, here's kind of interesting. In this article that I'm reading, here's who they quote as a source. Sherlock Holmes said,
I can guarantee you that is not a source. And same thing applies to these duck-billed dinosaurs as did the monkeys earlier, except it's much more plausible because Africa would have been much closer to Europe than it was to South America when the monkeys crossed. And duck-billed dinosaurs were most likely strong swimmers. Their fossils are often found in aquatic environments. So, a few of them get swept out to sea on a vegetative raft similar to the one seen earlier in this video, and since they're powerful swimmers, should something happen to the raft, they can make a swim for it. Events like this are not uncommon. It's how lemurs populated Madagascar. It's how small lizards hop islands in the Bahamas even today. So, now let's see what the Holmes quote is.
Sherlock Holmes said, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth.
That statement, as popular as it has become, is entirely fallacious. It relies on the assumption that you will be able to somehow figure out when you have eliminated all potential options. How can you even be sure there isn't some option out there that you've just never even considered? You can't, it's not possible. So much pseudoscientific garbage gets justified with this line of thinking. It's disheartening to see legitimate scientists quoting it. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from the Count Alucard 666, who says, try and Google who invented running. It's a real riot. I have no idea why you posted that on my video, but I thoroughly enjoyed it and recommend that everybody do Google that now. It's really quite something. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the rafts that keep the monkey that is my channel afloat. If you'd like to bring me to a strange new land, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description, and if you'd like to listen to my videos in podcast form, the link for that is also in the description, as well as links to my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address. See you next time!